Ethiopia and Eritrea, and were present in a portion of Somalia. The British were present, of course, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Nyasaland, in Rhodesia, and in Nigeria, and in many other places. The French, of course, were also present. And all these powers, even the Spaniards, were present in Equatorial Guinea, as were the Portuguese. And the whole idea was to use the resources, both natural and human, of the African continent, so that the partition of Africa was one that was designed to benefit the European powers. The partition was arbitrary. If you look at the nation states that we now have, or is it states that we now have with many nations in them, every other African country that we are talking about now is struggling to be a state. All of them, without exception, all of them. And this is what Pixley Kaisa Kasemo was saying. How will we regenerate this continent? And it's instructive that he was talking at a time when the entire continent of Africa was under colonization, excluding Liberia and Ethiopia, all of them. And therefore, when in 1945, Africans were represented in Manchester, Kwame Nkrumah was present at that meeting, Marcus Garvey was present at that meeting, Jomo Kenyatta was present at that meeting, Obafemi Awolowo was present at that meeting. The drive was to decolonize Africa. And one of the things that amazes me is that at that time, these individuals did not have the internet, they did not have WhatsApp, they did not have the kind of communication that we have now. But it is amazing at how they were communicating. Even air transport was not as it is now. I was just recently reading the activities of one of the greatest Africans who, in my view, ever lived, and whom many people do not know about. The great Ghanaian James Emmons Kwegyir Agri, normally referred to as Agri of Africa, and how he traveled from the United States and went to many countries in Africa, traveling by sea and talking about why Africa should be united. And that was Pan-Africanism, the Pan-African spirit at that time. Of course, we then went into the era of decolonization. And the spirit again was one which was consistent. You had people from the Caribbean participating in the struggle in that regard. You have people like W.B. Du Bois saying that Africa must be free. A little later, people like Martin Luther King Jr., and people like Malcolm X, talking of George Padmore, talking about how Africa should be liberated and we should work with people in the diaspora. And then the agitation was there that we must regain our independence. And famously in 1949, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah is saying, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and the rest will be given unto you." And I dare say that the rest has never been given to us. And even if it is coming too slowly. But it is instructive that at that time, the spirit was about the continent of Africa. We were conscious, the leaders were conscious, that Africa decolonized without unity would remain weak. And of course, Africa is weak. The weakest continent on earth is this continent in which we are, our continent. So the struggle for independence was everywhere across the world, across the continent of Africa. So when on the 6th day of March, Ghana regained her independence as Ghana, it was then Gold Coast, I think the most eloquent and the most passionate warrior for Pan-Africanism was Nkrumah. He said on that day, and again later, that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. And he meant it, because when Ghana regained independence in 1957, 1 year later, Guinea regained her independence. A year later, the French Sudan, or what we now call Mali, regained her independence. They signed a pact to create what they call the African Union. They thought at that time that that would be Africa in her embryonic days. And they invited Patrice Emery Lumumba in 1961, but of course Emery Lumumba was then assassinated in the month of January 1961. And he warned, this is one of the things that always stands out in my mind, that Nkrumah, of all leaders at that time, was able to see that if we were not united, we would go nowhere. So in 1958, he summons a meeting in Accra, Ghana, of the then independent African countries and tells them, if we don't unite now, the neo-colonialist is going to ensure that we remain disunited and we remain small, and they are going to ensure that the neo-colonial project continues. In 1961, on the first day of January, again in Casablanca, Morocco, he tells his audience, let us unite now, before each one of our leaders begins to get used to power, because power is easy to get used to. You who have been elected will know. Once you become a minister and you become used to people saluting you and opening your doors, if it happens for 1 month, you will find it very difficult if you lose your ministerial position when there is nobody to salute you and to open your doors. That is how attractive power can be. And he warned the people then. But the colonial project was alive and well, because as they were meeting in Casablanca, Morocco, there was another group that was meeting in Monrovia in Liberia. That is how Africa started splitting, creating two groups, the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group. The Casablanca group, which comprised, I think famously, Kwame Nkrumah was there from Ghana, Gamal Abdel Nasser was there from Egypt,